The House will please come to order. Those persons not having privilege to the floor will please vacate the chamber at this time. Members and guests in the galleries will please rise as we are led in prayer this morning by Pastor Adam Burkhammer. Pastor Burkhammer is the guest of the gentlemen from the 45th and 46th districts, Delegate Martin and Martin.
Let us pray. Lord, we're just so thankful, Lord, that we could just gather in a free country this morning, Lord, and we thank you that you've blessed us in that manner, Lord. I'm thankful for all the men and women that have sacrificed their lives here, Lord, for the betterment of this government, Lord, and I pray that you bless them for that sacrifice, Lord, and touch their families in a mighty way, Lord. And Lord, I just pray right now, Lord, that God's law be honored, Lord, above all, Lord. As we come and write laws, Lord, may they honor you in everything we do, Lord. And Lord, and I just pray for a revival fire to be started in this state, Lord, but I pray that it begins in this building, Lord. So I pray that your anointing touch each and every legislator right now. And it's in the mighty name of Jesus that I pray. And everybody said, amen. Amen.
Members and guests will please remain standing as we are led in the Pledge of Allegiance this morning by the gentleman from the 45th, Delegate Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Members and guests may be seated. Reading the Journal.
Journal of the House of Delegates, Charleston, Wednesday, January 15th, 2020.
Gentleman from the 46th, Delegate Martin.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of the journal be dispensed with and that it approve as having been read.
The gentleman from the 46th, Delegate Martin, asks unanimous consent that further reading of the journal be dispensed with and it be approved as having been read. Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Reading of the journal is dispensed with. Introduction of guests. Introduction of guests. The gentleman from the 10th, Delegate Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today from Williamstown, West Virginia, we have representing West Virginia State Firemen's Association, Doug Miracle. Doug, if you'd please stand, let the body make you feel welcome. Thank you.
The lady from the 57th, Delegate Rowan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Making the long trip from Hampshire and Mineral County, we have several distinguished firefighters in the gallery. Would they please stand and the House give them a wild and wonderful West Virginia welcome?
The gentleman from the 28th, Delegate Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following right along with what was just said, I would like to ask one of those firemen to stand up there. Mr. Bill Costamorris, would you stand, please? Quickly, I would like to tell you about Bill. Bill took a long out-of-business fire department, and through his leadership and a little bit of help from us, he revived it to make it the best fire department in our county. Thank you, Bill. Please give him a round of applause.
The gentleman from the 54th, Delegate Hott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also have firefighters down here today that made the long trip down from Maysville Volunteer Fire Department, along with New Creek Volunteer Fire Department. If they'd please stand and be recognized this time.
The lady from the 38th, Delegate Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a couple of pages here today that I'd like to introduce. We have Reese Lawson from Nitro High, and I'm given to understand that he happens to know that China has one time zone for the entire country. That's his interesting fact. And he's going to be taking my seat when I'm done here, I'm sure. He's a very smart kid. Sophie Lawson is his sister. She's at Andrew Jackson Middle School. Her interesting fact is that I'm told she may be the next Michelangelo. So, interesting facts. Could we welcome them to the chamber?
The gentleman, the 22nd, Delegate Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Delegate Maynard and myself, we have 2 pages working for us today. If they would stand, if I call their names. Hayden Hodge is a 7th grader from Hurricane Middle School. Lennon Hodge, a 4th grader from Hurricane Town Elementary. and they're being chaperoned by their parents, Tony and Jessica, in the West Gallery. If they would stand as well, and everybody make them welcome.
The gentleman at 46, Doug Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the North Gallery today, we have a couple guests joining Pastor Adam Burkhammer here. If they would stand as I say their names, if Riley would stand up, Jamie and Cooper Burkhammer, and of course Adam Burkhammer, if the House would please make them feel welcome.
The gentleman at 23rd, Doug Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With us in the West Gallery, we have our director of our Boone County 911 Center and his deputy director, Michael Mayhorn and Arch Griffith. If they would please stand in the House, make them feel welcome.
The gentleman at 25th, Doug Painter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Delegate Tony, I'd like to introduce some pages today from the 25th District, the land of the most beautiful land in the world and the finest people in the world. We have Mr. Robert Krause, Ms. Alyssa Johnson, Emma Maynard, Matthew Hatfield, and they are chaperoned by Kathy Hatfield, Renee Spartus, and Cindy Krause. Let's give them all a big house welcome.
The gentleman with 26, Doug Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to introduce in the South Gallery a fine daughter of McDowell County and one of my former students now living in Mercer County, Shakira Irvin, if she'd stand and be recognized. Also, Mr. Speaker, I'd like, by way of the video stream, to say and introduce to students that are watching at War School, Southside School in War, West Virginia, and they are all interested. They watch every day, and I'd like to say hello to all of them, please.
The gentleman at 36, Doug Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of all of us from Kanawha County, we have some pages serving for us today from Horseman Middle School. We have from 7th grade, James Switzer, Takia Carter, and from 8th grade, Ethan Lanham, Lillian Murray, MJ Dixon, and Anaya Heck. The House will make them feel welcome.
The gentleman at 34th, Doug Boggs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very happy to have in the South Gallery today some wonderful friends and firefighters that represent all across Braxton County. First, I've got Paul Beatty. If you all would stand, Paul Beatty, he's the president of the Braxton Firefighters Association. And also, I'd like to welcome also Bridget McLaughlin Miller, Kim Rollison, and my good friend, longtime childhood friend, Randy James from Frametown Fire Department. Please make them welcome.
The gentleman at 35th, Doug Bird.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the South Gallery today, we have some carpenters from Local 439 who are wearing the brightest shirts up there. So would you all please stand and make the House feel them welcome?
The gentleman at 55th, Doug Spinagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the North Gallery behind me today, we have 3 individuals that came down from Moorefield. On behalf of the Moorefield Volunteer Fire Department, company number 46, we have Doug Mongold, Lance Taylor, and Harry Shockey. Will you all please rise, and will the House make them welcome?
Are there additional introductions? If not, report to standing committees.
Your Committee on Health and Human Resources has had under consideration House Bill 4108 relating generally to certificates of need for health care services. Reports the same back with the committee substitute do pass.
Report to be received.
Your Committee on Industry and Labor has had under consideration House Bill 4104 clarifying the definition of an employee for the purposes of unemployment compensation and workers' compensation. Reports the same back with the recommendation that it do pass, that it be referred to the Committee on Government Organization.
Report to be received.
Your Committee on...
House Bill 4104 be referred to the Committee on Government Organization.
Your Committee on Technology and Infrastructure has had under consideration House Bill 4051, authorizing the West Virginia Tourism Office to enter into an agreement with the Division of Highways to provide staff at the Welcome Centers. Reports the same back with recommendation that it do pass, that it be referred to Committee on Finance.
Report will be received. The bill will be referred to the Committee on Finance.
Your Committee on Technology and Infrastructure has had under consideration House Bill 2877 relating to charging a fee for parking in an accessible parking space bearing the international symbol of access. Reports the same back with amendment with recommendation that it do pass, that it be referred to Committee on Judiciary.
The report will be received. The bill will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
Your Committee on Judiciary has had under consideration House Bill 4130 relating to competitive bidding for government construction contracts arising out of declared states of emergency. Reports the same back with recommendation that it do pass.
The report will be received.
Your Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration House Bill 4020 removing authority of municipalities to require occupational licensure if licensure for the occupation is required by the state. Reports back to committee substitute, therefore, with recommendation that the committee substitute to pass.
The report will be received.
Your Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration House Bill 4017 establishing country roads accountability and transparency. Reports back to committee substitute, therefore, with recommendation that the committee substitute to pass.
The report will be received.
Your Committee on Government Organizations had under consideration House Bill 4121 relating to state boards of examination or registration. Reports the same back with recommendation that it do pass, that it be referred to Committee on Finance.
The report will be received. The bill will be referred to the Committee on Finance.
Your Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration House Bill 4141 requiring the Department of Administration to publish its comprehensive annual financial report by the end of December. Reports the same back with recommendation that it do pass.
The report will be received.
Your Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration House Concurrent Resolution 8 admitting certain counties and independent cities of the Commonwealth of Virginia to be admitted to the state of West Virginia as constituent counties. Reports back to committee substitute with recommendation that the committee substitute be adopted, that it be referred to Committee on Rules.
The report will be received. The resolution will be referred to the Committee on Rules.
Your Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration Senate Concurrent Resolution 2 requesting Frederick County, Virginia consider becoming part of the state of West Virginia. Reports the same back with recommendation that it be adopted, that it be referred to Committee on Rules.
The report will be received. The resolution will be referred to the Committee on Rules. Are there further reports of standing committees? If not, reports of select committees. Messages from the executive, messages from the Senate.
Clerk of the Senate announces the passage by the Senate of Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 94, providing persons with physical disabilities to vote by electronic absentee ballot.
The message will be received. The bill will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary. Are there further messages from the Senate? If not, resolutions.
House Concurrent Resolution 13, Watt Brothers Memorial Road.
Lady of the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of resolutions introduced be dispensed with and that each resolution be considered as formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committees as indicated on the chamber automation system.
The lady in the 49th asks unanimous consent that further reading of resolutions introduced be dispensed with and that each resolution be considered as having been formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committees as shown on the chamber automation system. Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Petitions, motions, bills introduced.
House Bill 4364, creating a tax credit for hiring an ex-felon.
Lady in the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of bills introduced be dispensed with and that each bill be considered as formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committees as indicated on the chamber automation system.
The lady in the 49th asks unanimous consent that further reading of bills introduced be dispensed with and that each bill be considered as having been formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committees as shown on the chamber automation system. Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Unfinished business. Bills on third reading. Bills on second reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2602, including possession of known stolen property and the offense of receiving or transferring stolen property.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2679, relating to state-issued identification cards.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2696, creating an additional index system for state-owned lands.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
House Bill 2922, relating to the requirements to obtain a final order of discharge and dismissal for possession of opiates or opioids.
Are there amendments?
Delegate Fast moves the bill. This is HFA Fast 1-16.
Clerk will read the amendment. House will please be in order while the clerk reads the amendment.
Delegate Fast moves to amend the bill on page 1, section 4078, line 4, by striking out the words "other than marijuana" and the comma.
Question before the House is the adoption of the amendment. Chair recognizes the gentleman from the 32nd, Delegate Fast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this bill is a situation where a person who has a drug conviction at the end of the sentencing phase, at the end of probation, it says the court may, as an additional condition for the entry of a final order of discharge or dismissal, that the court has to, may, and it's permissive, may require an evaluation for admission into a drug court program or require the defendant to participate in a drug treatment program. Again, understand, this is after there has been a conviction of some drug issue. So my amendment has nothing to do with whether a person is convicted of possession of marijuana or not. As we stand here today, possession of marijuana is illegal. But my amendment, this bill, has nothing to do whether a person is convicted of possession of marijuana, opiates, heroin, or anything else. What this bill does, it says that after a person is convicted of whatever the drug charge, that the judge may require an evaluation for a drug court program or require the participant to enter into treatment. And so when there's already been a conviction, I don't believe that it's proper to single out marijuana and not give the defendant that benefit of a treatment program. But the way the bill is written, the judge would not even have that option, and the defendant would not even be able to participate in treatment under this bill because it happened to be marijuana. If it happened to be heroin, yeah, the defendant may get that treatment. If it happens to be ecstasy, the defendant may get that treatment. If it happens to be an opioid, the defendant may get that treatment. But it just singles out marijuana, so it eliminates that option. And so I believe that we should take that language out where it says conviction other than marijuana. Just take that language out so that all options are on the table for the judges in these situations after. And again, we're looking at the end of the sentencing phase, the end of probation, and so that's my amendment. I would encourage your support. Thank you.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the adoption of the amendment? The gentleman, the 61st, Delegate Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to speak in opposition of the gentleman's amendment. We have such a crisis in this state from opioids and heroin. And we have limited resources for drug treatment. And I don't think that we should be using drug treatment resources for marijuana. And marijuana is legal in around 30 states in this country, including this one. Right now, people are submitting their applications through our cannabis program in West Virginia. And I think this is a step in the wrong direction. And again, the resources for drug treatment need to be on opioids and heroin that is devastating this state. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman, the 16th, Delegate Hornbuckle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, too, rise in opposition. Simply put, cannabis is not an opiate or opioid. It doesn't belong there. And also medically proven that it has no physically addictive properties. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman, the 36th, Delegate Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the chair of judiciary yield?
Chairman does yield for a question.
I will, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there a separate code that would reflect on expungement of marijuana? If a person's convicted of a marijuana charge or possession, is there a separate code that would reflect or be part of this discussion for marijuana possession?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I know that
believe
there
what
is a
we're
conditional discharge provision for simple possession of a small quantity of marijuana that governs that situation, in which the judge has some flexibility in that case. But I don't practice criminal law, so you might be better off to ask the question to someone else.
Well, what I'm seeing here is, I believe it's been omitted here because we're dealing with opioids and those pharmaceuticals. However, there's another section of code that deals with small possession of marijuana and other issues of that sort. So if we include it into this, will there be conflict in the code?
I don't actually see a conflict. There may be duplicate provisions, but I don't see a conflict, because this statute basically gives the judge some latitude, some discretion. He does not have to impose these additional conditions to anyone, whether it's marijuana use or any other use. So I don't see a conflict. There may be a duplication, but I don't see a conflict.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Speak to the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, gentleman's recognized.
What we're seeing here is, in this code, we're directly looking at controlled substances, and on line 5, it states opiate or opioid. If we have a different expungement code that will reflect the marijuana, I believe the gentleman's amendment will show some conflict in our expungement that some members of this body worked so hard last year to implement. So if we introduce or approve the gentleman's amendment, I believe we're going to create conflict with code that members of this body actually just enacted less than 12 months ago. So I would oppose the amendment. Thank you.
The lady from the 48th, Waxman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think our federal government might disagree somewhat with the idea that marijuana is so insignificant and drug treatment courts or drug treatment therapies aren't important in it. When I was in the legislature several years ago, the federal government was encouraging everybody to watch the movie Chasing the Dragon that they had put out, and every single person in that movie, their gateway drug was marijuana. So I don't think it's unreasonable to consider that if somebody's been convicted, to allow a judge to send that individual for treatment. And I support the amendment. I think that it's important. Thank you.
Lady from the 65th, Dr. Brown.
All right, I'll be brief. We've already passed legislation that was supposed to promote medical marijuana as something that would be a prescriptive drug, that could be something that would assist patient health and rehabilitation in and of itself. And so as the co-sponsor of this bill, I have to speak in opposition of this amendment, strictly because we cannot stigmatize an item that could potentially be used to help the people of West Virginia. So I am in staunch opposition of this amendment. I do believe that we need to really shift our rhetoric around something that will help people, and I will ultimately support the bill that I co-sponsored.
The gentleman of the 56th, Dr. Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Judiciary Chair yield?
I'm not a criminal law expert, okay? Just get that out first.
I just have a question. Without the gentleman's amendment, if someone did have a problem with marijuana and asked the judge for help to get off that, would the judge still be able to make that part of the thing, or would this amendment be needed so the judge could do that?
The way I understand this statute, it's at the end of the sentence. Before a final order of, I think it's called dismissal. And this is an additional option that the judge has available if he's concerned, he or she's concerned that there might be a need for additional treatment. The way the bill reads now, that would apply in any situation regarding the substance that the person has pled guilty to possessing, except marijuana. So
But if the person who was before the judge voluntarily said, I would like to have this additional help, could the judge make that part of the...
Could the judge, well, if it's by consent, I would think the judge could do that, but this is, gives the judge the right to order that be done.
Okay. So if the judge could grant it if the person requested it?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The gentleman at 37th, Dr. Pushkin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the sponsor of the amendment yield?
Gentleman does yield.
Thank you. So my first question is, I might have missed it, but did you offer this amendment in committee?
No.
Okay.
And the reason I didn't is because it came up and went so fast, I just didn't have time to get to it.
Okay, so you just now thought of it, or in between then and
Well,
now?
I didn't just now think of it. I thought of it immediately afterwards.
Okay, my other question is, I mean, you do criminal defense work, correct?
I'm sorry?
You do criminal defense work in your
I do, yes.
in your real life, right?
Yes.
How many drug courts have you visited personally?
One.
One?
In Fayette County.
Okay. And did you know a lot of folks in there who were there for possession of cannabis?
There's people in there from all types of drugs, and I will give you a live example. The very first graduate from the Fayette County Drug Court was a person that her very first illegal controlled substance was marijuana, and then it moved to other controlled substances, and that was her quote, that was the link that got her into other illicit drugs.
Okay.
So, and I mean, I'm not here to say whether we should be convicting people for marijuana or not. That's not what this bill does. So.
Mm-hmm. I understand what the bill does, and I understand what the amendment. Thank you very much for yielding.
Sure.
Mr. Speaker, at the appropriate time, I just want to
Yes, gentlemen, recognized to proceed.
I have visited the Kanawha County Drug Court many times, and I fully support drug courts. I think we should try to expand them in as many places as we have resources to do so. I think the effect of this amendment, though, would be to add a lot of people into the drug courts who don't necessarily need to be there, and that would hinder the help that it would give to the people who do need to be there. And while it's true that most people who use I don't think anybody could disagree. The more dangerous drugs like heroin, like methamphetamine, cocaine, yeah, a lot of them. Nobody started off with that. Nobody just started off going straight to those drugs. Some started off with alcohol, some started off with nicotine, some started off with cannabis. But if you look at what about the majority of people who have of people who have used cannabis who never did move on to those. So I don't know if the whole gateway theory really holds up, because I would say there's a whole lot of people. I imagine some people in this room and some people in the gallery who have tried cannabis and didn't go on to harder drugs. I bet you, if we were honest, there's probably a few of us who have tried it and did not move on to harder drugs. I think the effect of the amendment would really overburden the drug courts. If you have anybody that was arrested or charged with possession of cannabis would have to go to a drug court or a treatment center. I've also visited a lot of the treatment centers that we have in this district and all over the state, and very rarely do you have somebody who's in there for cannabis. I think it would really diminish the amount of help that we're able to give to the people who actually need it. I would strongly urge rejection of this amendment. I think it harms the bill.
The gentleman, the 58th, Dr. Coles.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the amendment. I would like to note a couple things. This amendment the bill is an option for the court. The way I read it, it's an option for the court to provide help and assistance to an addict that comes before the judge. The trigger difference, I think, is the criminal offense that gets that addict in front of the judge. If that trigger is marijuana, the bill saying there will be no help. I think the gentleman from the 32nd is saying if the criminal offense is marijuana, perhaps we should allow the judge this flexibility to offer that help as well. It's not the underlying addiction. It is the criminal offense that triggers it. So there may be a meth addict or an opiate addict, but if they're before the judge with a criminal offense of marijuana, I think they should be entitled to the same consideration and options the judge might have to provide help and assistance. So I'm in favor of the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The lady from 51st, Dr. Fleischauer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to the amendment in part because of 60A-4-402, which the gentleman from Kanawha referred to in his earlier. What that code section says is, notwithstanding any other provision of this chapter to the contrary, any first offense for distributing less than 15 grams of marijuana without any remuneration shall be disposed of under Section 407. We enacted that in 1971, and what that means is that there will be a conditional discharge. So what we would be doing would be reversing 50 years of practice that if you have small amounts of marijuana, you are not mandated to have treatment, especially when, many people believe that marijuana is not addictive. And so we would all be paying for these two courses that are going to be mandated, and I think it's unnecessary, and I do think it is a conflict with this section of the code, so I urge rejection.
The gentleman of the 29th, Dr. Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think one important thing to remember here is how this bill operates in the actual criminal justice system, and not us just sitting in here and thinking about it. So a person is charged with a crime. Okay, they get charged with a crime, they go in, maybe they plead guilty, maybe they get adjudicated or whatever the case might be, and they get a sentence on that crime. So let's say this person's in possession of a small amount of heroin, a small amount of meth, and a small amount of marijuana. Okay, if the opioids are in there or something like that, and this judge sentences them to a year in jail, suspends the sentence for supervised probation, and then they get down to the end of it. Okay. What this bill does is it lets the judge say, hey, there's opioids in here. You didn't go through a drug court, and based off what the probation officer's telling me, I'm gonna go ahead and order you to go through drug court because of that opioid attachment there. And I think the bill recognizes that we have an elevated problem with opioids in West Virginia. And that's the whole idea of why I voted for it. I can see why we need to do that. On the flip side of that, let's say that you have a fella gets picked up on a traffic stop, and he's got $40 worth of marijuana on him. He goes into court, and he pleads guilty to that possession. Probation officer is interviewing him and stuff like that. So he gets a year in jail, suspend the sentence, give him a year of probation. The probation officer's doing the initial interview and finds out, hey, this guy's had a past opioid problem. He's got a past opioid problem, okay? So the only thing he's there for is marijuana, okay? Possession of marijuana. But the probation officer finds out he's got a past opioid problem. He gets down to the end of probation. Probation officer just doesn't like him. Judge just doesn't like him, whatever the case might be. And the judge says, well, you had opioids in your past. I know it wasn't part of this crime, but nothing prevents me, from saying because of marijuana, I'm going to put you in drug court now and keep this person on probation for another year. I can tell you what generally happens in these situations, and you see it a lot with supervised sex offenders. With sex offenders, you get extended supervision. So you have this initial sentence, you're getting a probation, and then you get tacked on to the end of it 3 years, 10 years, 15, sometimes lifetime supervision, so that these people can be watched, okay? And for good reason. We catch a lot of people that way because of continued bad behavior. Continued bad behavior. What I see here by extending this to marijuana is you're creating another hook to drag that person right back into the criminal justice system, to get a whole other charge to get going all over marijuana. All over marijuana. If this person commits another crime, fine. Pick them up, charge them with another crime, prosecute that crime. But don't hold on to somebody for 2 years, 3 years. I mean, there's no time limit in this bill. There's no time limit in this bill. You're telling me over a misdemeanor marijuana charge, we're going to hook somebody for 3 or 4 years, keep them in the system, keep bullying them. I promise you, if you watch these people long enough, they will mess up. And then you're just re-stigmatizing them. You're putting another crime on them. You're making it harder for them to get a job, all because of marijuana. Now, that's a policy thing. I mean, clearly the sponsor of the amendment, his policy is he don't like marijuana, and that's great. But the public policy that's been put forth by this body for the last 5 years has transitioned from criminalizing marijuana to recognizing its medicinal value. I've got people in my family that have never touched alcohol a day in their life that take CBD oil every day, and now they swear by it. It's helping people. It's helping people with their injuries. It's helping people with their aches and pains as they're growing older. It's helping people with anxiety issues. It's helping. It's getting people away from opiates. And what we're doing, if we adopt this amendment, we are sending mixed signals to not just our citizens, but to the world. We have got to make up our mind. Are we done stigmatizing marijuana? We've got to be done. We've decided, how many times have we decided? Like 5, 6 times that we're done stigmatizing marijuana. And here we are again. Let's just stigmatize it again. It's time to quit. It's time to quit stigmatizing it. It's time to quit talking about it. I mean, I remember last year, the delegate from the 37th put forth an amendment that would have rescheduled marijuana to class 4. That's the bill we need to run. We need to destigmatize it. We need to get it done and quit this nonsense of trying to hook somebody on marijuana just because they got a bag of weed. It's old. We got bigger problems to take care of. We got taxes that need eliminated. We've got so many issues that we can address. We need to leave this alone and move on from it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The lady in the 32nd, Douglas Staggers.
Would the gentleman from the 32nd yield?
The sponsor of the amendment?
Sponsor of the amendment, yes, sir.
The gentleman does yield.
Yes.
I was unaware of a specific treatment protocol or any treatment for the use of marijuana. Is that something new? In the ER, we don't treat marijuana. So they would be sent to where? Is there a new treatment place to treat marijuana?
From my colleague, also from the 32nd, I know that there are drug treatment programs. And if this body is going to all of a sudden determine that marijuana is not a drug, then this body can do that. But if a person has a problem with marijuana, they should be afforded drug treatment the same as a person who has a problem with heroin or ecstasy or opioids. They should be afforded the same opportunities, and the judge should have, the judge who sits there and sees that person, who hears that person, they should have the same latitude and opportunity as everyone else. And so that's the point of my amendment.
I'm sorry, maybe you didn't understand my question. Is there a medical treatment for marijuana addiction?
There can be treatment, yes, for drugs in general. And it could be marijuana. There could be help for people who have marijuana problems. Now, if we're going to decide that people don't have marijuana problems and ignore the medical testimony that we've heard up in judiciary over the last couple of years, that's a different issue. But people who have marijuana problems deserve the same treatment that those who may not.
The gentleman, the 22nd, Doug Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Chair of Judiciary please yield?
Reluctantly, yes.
I trust your opinion on this. That's why I wanted to ask for you. If we adopt this amendment and strike out other than marijuana, or if we don't, rather, say somebody's hooked on marijuana laced with fentanyl, would they still be eligible to go through this program or use this?
And I'm sorry, what was the question? What was the, you mentioned fentanyl, but I didn't get the transition.
If an addict is smoking marijuana laced with fentanyl, which is an opioid.
The way I read the statute, okay, is the trigger is basically a plea or a conviction of a violation of 60A 4-401C. Okay, that's possession, okay? And it goes on to say, if it's a possession of any of the Schedule I substances in that section, other than marijuana, then the judge would have this additional option at the conclusion of what has already been imposed, whether it be a jail sentence or a period of probation under supervision or whatever, before the final, what they call the final order of discharge or dismissal. So if you're asking about during the course of that probationary period, there's an additional charge of fentanyl, is that what you're asking me?
No, it seems to me that sometimes marijuana is laced with other products and they're smoking it or whatever, and if it's laced with fentanyl in the marijuana, how's this going to affect charges?
Well, I think the key is not what turns out to be in the marijuana, is what the charge was, possession of what substance that person was charged with.
So they can still charge them for opioids if they find opioids in the marijuana?
So, yeah, I think it's the charge, if the charge was possession of marijuana, and this statute is enacted without the amendment, then the way I read it is that option to require additional treatment, or I think the first thing is admission to the drug court program. The second option is required participation. The first one is evaluation for the program. Now, all this, of course, is discretionary with the judge. The judge may not go this route. He could order an evaluation for admission into the drug court program. If the evaluation indicates this person is a good candidate, then he could actually order that person to participate. And the court could also condition this discharge order on a successful completion of the program. So you'd have 3 steps. Evaluation, the drug court could say it's not a suitable candidate, okay? But if it does, then the judge could order participation. The judge could also condition this order on successful completion of the program. Now, whether the marijuana was contaminated with fentanyl or not, I don't think that would have, the way I read this statute, I don't think that would have any bearing on whether the judge would have that option. If the plea was to possession of marijuana, then I think this language currently in the bill would basically eliminate the judge's discretion for those 3 options. I don't know if that answers your question or not. That's the best I can do.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman, the third, Doug Fluharty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the sponsor of the amendment yield?
Sure.
I'll be brief. When an individual is evaluated for admission to a drug court program, you know, and they go through the court proceedings, who's paying for that?
Can you repeat the question? There was some chatter back here. I couldn't hear you.
When somebody is being evaluated for admission into a drug court program, they go through the criminal justice system and our court structure. Who's paying for that? You mentioned that you do some criminal defense work. Typically, is it the taxpayer who's paying for all this?
Well, it depends on the defendant and the defendant's financial abilities or lack thereof. If they're indigent and they have court-appointed counsel, then the taxpayers usually front the cost. However, courts usually assess the cost against the defendant and required it to be paid back at the end
And how
or after.
How successful is that payback usually?
I don't know. I have not looked at those numbers at all. I just know that that's what the court usually does.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for you.
Sure.
Very briefly.
Yes, gentleman's recognized to proceed.
You know, and I wholeheartedly agree with the gentleman from the 29th in his assessment of what this amendment really does. It's locking people into our criminal justice system longer, the state's holding on to them longer, and the taxpayers are paying for it longer. Yet here we are. You know, the movie, we heard reference to a movie earlier. Reefer Madness was released in 1936. And here we are in 2020 in the state of West Virginia acting like it's a real documentary. It blows my mind. While other states are actually making money, helping taxpayers by decriminalizing and then legalizing cannabis, here we are debating keeping people in the system longer. And as the gentleman who is the lead sponsor of the bill stated earlier, we only have so many resources to go around. Yet we're going to lock people in the system longer and exhaust our resources on cannabis. Let's have some real debate in this House on legalization and decriminalization instead of wasting time on these faulty amendments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman to the 15th, Doug Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to point out one thing, and this discussion has been over an issue of basically, in my opinion, we're removing the discretion of the judge with this bill. What this amendment would do is allow the discretion of the judge, who has been more involved with basically the offender. And what we did yesterday was dealing with and this bill was the exact same question of, do we remove the ability of the judge, or do we allow the judge more discretion? When we dealt with the age of 14 years old of a child, we leaned in favor of the discretion of the judge. And I believe in this situation we should also do that, leaning in favor of the discretion of the judge in order whether this person needs treatment and help or not. And we're removing the ability of a judge to get somebody who has committed an offense help and treatment. And I think that decision should be left up to the judge. Thank you.
The gentleman to the 53rd, Doug Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I'm going to speak to you as a paramedic. As a paramedic and the EMS, we see the results of this first. Way before they're all cleaned up and they go to the ER, we see what the house is like, what's there. Usually it smells like a brush fire. Does that tell you anything? When you walk in, and you walk in and you see people that are laying there, their pupils are pinpoint. Well, we all know what that means. So we grab the Narcan, we shoot them if we can get a vein open. Otherwise, we shoot it up their nose, hoping that it'll get into them. And I remember when this opioid thing started a few years ago. I was a paramedic then, and we kept on saying, why are they giving these people all these drugs? You guys thought that you allowed it to happen. You told them that the doctors and everybody said, well, we don't want anybody in pain. So now then we're spending billions trying to stop this. And you're trying to start another thing where everybody's saying, oh, this is okay. This is going to help everybody. How about the kids that's in Morgantown that vaped too much THC and they almost died? But they were underage, and we forget about those things. The biggest thing about accepting his amendment is that it tells kids it is not okay to use marijuana. It is not okay to put it in your vapor and inhale it. But if we say everything is okay, or all these drugs are bad except for marijuana, what's that telling our kids at school? And I surely think that this body should not want to single out marijuana and tell our kids it's okay for you to smoke marijuana or do whatever you want to do with marijuana because it's an okay drug. And I certainly support the amendment. Thank you.
The gentleman to 32nd to close debate on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This actually is a classic case of discrimination where we're going to discriminate against one drug versus another. Contrary to what you heard, saying that without this amendment we're going to keep people in the, or with this amendment we're going to keep people hooked in the court system. Well, if you follow that logic, if anyone who's in treatment for any drug is hooked into the court system until their treatment is over, or if they're in the drug court program, they're in that program until the case is over. So whether it's marijuana or whether it's heroin or anything else, they're still going to be in the court system. I think, ladies and gentlemen, it's so important to understand this is permissive by the judge. If you just simply read the language of the bill, the court may, as a condition for entry of a final order of discharge, implement these two options. Again, the judge sees the person, they hear from the defense counsel, they hear from the prosecution, they'll hear from the probation officer, and it gives the court the option to say, you know what, I think there needs to be an additional step in your life before you're discharged from this conviction. Keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, this is all after a conviction. It's not putting anyone in jail for marijuana. The conviction, whatever it is, has already taken place. So I think the amendment makes sense, and I would urge passage. Thank you, Mr.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment. A roll call has been demanded. Is the demand sustained? The demand is sustained. The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 30 ayes, 68 nays, 2 members absent not voting, less than a majority having voted in the affirmative. Chair declares the amendment rejected. Are there further amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced. Next bill on second reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2924, permitting the West Virginia Tourism Office to decide to contract with the Division of Highways to sell advertising space on the West Virginia 511 website.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
House Bill 4010, changing the licensing requirements for certain casino employees.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4042, requiring agencies exempt from some or all of state purchasing requirements to adopt procedural rules.
Are there amendments?
Delegate Summers moves to amend the bill.
Clerk will read the amendment.
On page 1, section 12, line 5, after the date September 1, 2020, by inserting the following sentence. After September 1, 2020, any agency which has not filed its procedural rule as required by this section shall follow the procurement requirements established by the Purchasing Division.
You've heard the amendment. The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment. Chair recognizes the lady from the 49th, Delegate Summers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge adoption of this amendment. Once I spoke to the Government Organization Committee chair, he said that this would strengthen the bill. We have been seeing that we were trying to give flexibility to some organizations to not comply with the purchasing requirements, and they are taking advantage of that and not establishing rules. So if they cannot do this, then they will revert back to the purchasing division's requirements. Thank you.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the adoption of the amendment? If not, those in favor of the amendment will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares the amendment adopted. Are there further amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced. Are there further bills on second reading? If not, bills on first reading.
House Bill 4062, reducing the cost of prescription drugs.
Bill to be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4091, allowing for expedited oil and gas well permitting upon payment of applicable expedited fees.
Bill to be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4096, requiring candidates to live in the state or local election district for the office for which they are seeking.
The bill to be advanced. Are there further bills on first reading? If not, leaves of absence. Lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For our colleagues, Delegate Espinoza and Rodriguez.
Are there objections to leaves being granted? Chair hears no objection. Leave shall be granted. Remarks by members of the House. The gentleman from the 64th, Delegate Householder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, great news for West Virginia. As it's been reported in the Martinsburg Journal today, and of course the governor's office has issued a press release, that Clorox plans to build a manufacturing facility in Berkeley County. And it was reported that this facility will create 100 new jobs, and it's an expected $190 million economic impact to the region. So I hope everyone will join me today in thanking Clorox for investing in our state. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman, the 39th, Douglas Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to take a moment to call the members' attention to the fact that today, January 16th, is National Religious Freedom Day. This date has been officially proclaimed as such by presidential proclamations every year since 1993. National Religious Freedom Day commemorates a profoundly impactful action by our now estranged brethren serving in the Virginia General Assembly way back in 1786. It was on January 16th of that year that Thomas Jefferson's landmark Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom was adopted by the Assembly. That statute became the basis for the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States and led to the guarantee of religious freedom for all Americans. So today, let us acknowledge and celebrate religious freedom, the quest for which brought the Pilgrims first to the New World. Religious freedom, the first of all freedoms articulated in the Bill of Rights. Religious freedom, the bedrock of our liberties and the very essence of what makes America great. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman, the 56th, Douglas Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was asked to notify you, on your desk you have an invitation to meet our Congress people on Thursday, January 22nd. That is actually Wednesday, January 22nd, so in case you were wondering. Thank you.
Gentleman, the 27th, Douglas Porterfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask that the comments of my colleague from the 39th Districts be put in the appendix of the journal. Thank you.
The 39th or the 59th?
39th.
Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Are there further remarks? If not, introduction to guests. The gentleman, the 23rd, Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have some first responders from Boone County in the North Gallery we'd like to recognize, representing the West Virginia Firefighters Association. We have John Holston, Doug Estep, Randy Walls, and Drew Powell. If they would please stand and the House make them feel welcome.
The gentleman, the 22nd, Douglas Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is Firefighter Day at the Capitol, and I just wanted to do some cleanup. If anybody hasn't been introduced, would you please stand, and would all firefighters in the state of West Virginia that's here today please stand, and the House please make them feel welcome. Thank you, guys, for everything you do.
The gentleman, the 22nd, Douglas Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to announce our Doctor of the Day today. Back here with me, if she'd please stand, we have Ellen Berry from Huntington, West Virginia. If everybody make her welcome.
The gentleman, the 35th, Douglas Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the South Gallery today, we had some students and teachers from South Charleston High School that got to watch the process and the debate today, and they really enjoyed it. So would you all please stand and the House make them feel welcome?
The gentleman, the 2nd, Douglas Desario.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, joining us in the South Gallery, I see former delegate and his wife, Scott Brewer. If we could all stand and make them feel welcome.
The gentleman, the 50th, Douglas Caputo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Along with the Brew crew up there in the South Gallery, we have some union carpenters from Local 439 right here in Charleston. Would you guys stand up and let the House make you welcome?
Additional introductions. If not, miscellaneous business. If none, then the lady from the 49th for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move subject to announcement that the House adjourn until 11 a.m. Friday.
The lady from the 49th moves that subject to announcements. The House stand adjourned until 11 a.m. tomorrow. Are there announcements?
Mr. Speaker.
Lady from the 49th.
Your Committee on Rules will meet at 10:45 a.m. tomorrow behind the chamber.
The gentleman from the 28th, Doug Pack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have two announcements. First of all, Republican members of the House will caucus briefly upon our adjournment. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Health and Human Resources will meet today at 3 p.m. in the East Wing Conference Room. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 10th, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Finance will meet tomorrow morning, January 17th at 9 a.m. for a budget presentation from the Department of the Administration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 27th, Doug Schott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The members of the House Committee on the Judiciary, we're going to resume the one bill that we have left on our agenda at 12:30, following the caucus of the Republicans, hopefully, in an effort to avoid having to come back for that one bill at 5 o'clock, almost 5 hours later. That will be our intention. If we're unable to meet at 12:30, then we will have to come back at 5 o'clock. Also, inquiry of the clerk whether for the availability of the chamber on Monday, January 20th at 8:30 for the purpose of a public hearing.
Chair is advised by the clerk, chamber is available.
Thank you. To the members, there will be a public hearing on the DMAPS rules bundle, which is committee substitute for House Bill 4275, which contains the Fire Commission rules. That's 87 CSR 1 and 87 CSR 4. That public hearing will be Monday, January 20, 2020 at 8:30 in the morning here in the House chamber. To all the members, you're welcome to attend that because the bill itself was passed out of committee, subject to the public hearing that occurs as a result of it being requested following the placement of that bill on the agenda. So that bill will be before the entire body in the future. So you're welcome, and certainly welcome and urged to attend that public hearing Monday at 8:30 here in the chamber. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lady from the 32nd, Doug Kessinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Committee on the Prevention and Treatment of Substance Abuse will meet today at 1 p.m. in the Government Organization Committee Room. Additionally, the Republican members of the committee will meet at 12:45 in Chairman Rohrbach's office. That is room 209.
The gentleman from the 45th, Doug Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Government Organization will meet tomorrow, Friday the 17th at 9 a.m. in the GovOrg room. The agenda will be posted.
The gentleman from the 35th, Doug Capito.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., the Committee on the Judiciary will meet in the committee room, and the agenda for that meeting will be posted. Thank you.
Gentleman from the 16th, Doug Mant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a reminder, the subcommittee concerning Bill 4002 will be meeting today at 3:30 in the Judiciary Chairman's office. Thank you very much.
The gentleman from the 41st, Doug Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Republican members of the Health and Human Resources Committee will meet in the Chairman's office today at 2:45.
The gentleman from the 58th, Doug Coles.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Political Subdivisions will meet today at 1 p.m. in House Judiciary Committee Room. The agenda is posted.
Gentleman from the 12th, Doug Westfall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your subcommittee on House Bill 2185 will meet a very, very quick meeting in the House Judiciary Room, a meeting following session. 5-minute meeting or less. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 36th, Doug Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Democratic members of the House Health Committee will caucus 15 minutes prior to the meeting, 2:45 in room 230E.
The gentleman from the 50th, Doug Caputo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Democratic members of this body will caucus immediately upon adjournment in room 252. The Democratic members immediately upon adjournment in 252.
The gentleman from the 12th, Doug Westfall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To correct myself, the subcommittee on House Bill 2185 will meet immediately following the session for a 3-minute meeting in the House Judiciary Room. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question before the House is a motion by the lady from the 49th that the House stand and adjourn until 11 a.m. tomorrow. Those in favor will please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares the motion adopted. The House is adjourned until 11 a.m. tomorrow.
The Senate will please come to order. The Senate will please come to order. All those not having privileges of the floor will please vacate the chamber, and with those on the floor and our guests in the gallery, please rise as we are led in prayer this morning by Chuck Kinder, who is the lay pastor in Charleston, West Virginia. And then please remain standing as we are led in the pledge this morning by the senior senator from the 17th, Pastor Kinder.
Thank you, Mr. President. Shall we pray? In the rush of all the important business before us, we pause to acknowledge you, O Lord. We are reminded the psalmist says, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord watch the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. Lord, I saw on the news that we have 7,000 children in foster care in West Virginia. That seems like way too many. We pray for these young people right now, wherever they are, whatever they're doing. Protect them and comfort them. Give these men and women of the West Virginia Senate wisdom to fix that situation. We know so many grandparents around our state are stepping up to raise their grandchildren when parents are not available. Show us ways to give greater support to these grand families. We pray for these grandparents who are right now giving so much to help their families. We pray especially for these men and women in the West Virginia Senate and the support staff that help them. We thank you for their talents that they bring to this task, for their willingness to serve our state in this way. We pray that they would seek your guidance, follow your leading to do the important work before them. We pray for unity among our leaders, a spirit of cooperation throughout our branches of government. We ask for your blessing on our governor and the citizens of West Virginia. And we pray, Lord, that you would guide and lead and direct the efforts of these elected officials as they lay the foundation for our future steps. But most of all, we pray your will be done. Nothing more, nothing less, and nothing else. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor. The senior senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the members and the guests in the gallery please join me as we honor our flag? I pledge allegiance
Thank you. You may be seated. Reading of the journal.
West Virginia Legislature, Senate Journal, January 15th, 2020. The Senate met at 11:09 a.m.
The senator from Nicholas County requests unanimous consent that further reading of the journal be dispensed with and that it be approved as having been read. Is there objection? Chair hears none, so ordered. Introduction of guests. On behalf of the Senate, it is my pleasure to welcome our honorary pages for the day. Please stand and be recognized as your name is called. As guest of the senior senator from the 3rd, the senator from Pleasance, we have Abigail McKenzie. And as guest of the senator from Greenbrier County, we have Isabel Atkins and Elizabeth Atkins. And if they would stand, the Senate make them feel welcome. Thank you. You may be seated. Further introductions, the junior senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the Senate, it's my pleasure and yours to introduce our West Virginia Academy of Family Practice Doc of the Day. In the rear of the chamber, we have with us Dr. Ellen Berry. If you wouldn't mind standing, let the Senate give you a warm welcome.
Further introductions? Further introductions. The senator from Boone County.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are many firemen here today that we're going to honor as Fireman's Day, but specifically I have some folks that visited my office today, and they're mostly from my neck of the woods. So I'd like to recognize Jim Olddecker, Alum Creek, and then members of the Guyan River Volunteer Firemen, William Frazier, William Klein, William D. Frazier, Gabriel Neese, Michael Neese, Josie Nelson, Ashley Nelson, Kobe Vance. And from the Morrisville Fire Department, Doug Eastep and Randy Walls. From the Van Fire Department, Gary Howell. Buffalo Fire Department, Glenn Whittington, and Bancroft Volunteer Fire Department, Benjamin Moses. If they would stand and the Senate make them welcome.
Thank you. Further introductions. The senator from Greenbrier County.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to introduce Isabel and Elizabeth's grandfather who brought them here today, Mr. Roger Crabtree. If you would please stand so the Senate can make you feel welcome today.
The senator from Pleasants County.
I'd like to introduce the grandparents and parents of Abigail McKenzie. They're in the back gallery. If the parents, Andrew and Nettie McKenzie, would stand, and the grandparents are Linda and Rylan McKenzie, Richard McKenzie. Thank you.
The junior senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know it's as much your pleasure as mine to introduce our friend, Dr. Richard Duncan. He's a superintendent at Roane County Schools. Come to visit the Senate today. Members, would you please make him welcome?
Further introductions. The senior senator from the 8th.
Thank you, Mr. President. On your behalf and my junior senator from the KANAWHA's behalf, today we have with us our volunteer firemen that are here, but there's two that I'd like to recognize that are from our district. With Benjamin Moses and Glenn Whittington would stand, I'd ask the Senate to give them a warm welcome.
Further introductions. Communications from the House.
The Clerk of the House announced the passage by that body of House Bill 3039 relating to a court's consideration of the expression of a preference by a child in certain child custody matters.
The message will be received and referred to the Committee on the Judiciary.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4004, creating the West Virginia Sentencing Commission.
The message be received and referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
House Bill 4007, Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act.
Message will be received and referred to the Committee on Health and Human Resources with a second reference to the Committee on the Judiciary.
House Bill 4022, clarifying the qualifications of the Chancellor of the Higher Education Policy Commission.
Message be received and referred to the Committee on Education.
House Bill 4103, relating to Office of Drug Control Policy.
Message be received and referred to Committee on Health and Human Resources. Are there further communications from the House?
No, sir.
Communications from the Executive?
There are none.
Reports from standing committees?
Your Committee on Pensions has had under consideration Senate Bill 31, providing an 11-month window for PERS members to purchase certain credited service, and reports the same back with the recommendation that it do pass, but under the original double committee reference, first be referred to the Committee on Finance. Respectfully submitted, Michael T. Azinger, Chair.
Report will be received. Report will be received and referred to Committee on Finance. Further reports.
Your Committee on the Judiciary has had under consideration Senate Bill 125, prohibiting victim from being subjected to certain physical examinations for sexual offenses, and reports back to committee substitute for same, with the recommendation that the committee substitute do pass. Respectfully submitted, Charles S. Trump IV, Chair.
Report will be received.
Your Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration Senate Bill 138, Incentives for Consolidating Local Governments, and reports back to committee substitute for same, with the recommendation that the committee substitute do pass, but under the original double committee reference, first be referred to the Committee on Finance. Respectfully submitted, Mark R. Maynard, Chair.
Report will be received, and under the bill's original double committee reference will be referred to the Committee on Finance.
Your Committee on Interstate Cooperation has had under consideration Senate Bill 197, enacting recognition of emergency medical services personnel licensure interstate compact, and reports the same back with the recommendation that it do pass, but under the original double committee reference, first be referred to the Committee on the Judiciary. Respectfully submitted, Sue Klein, Chair.
Report will be received and referred to the Committee on Finance.
Your Committee on the Workforce has had under consideration Senate Bill 217 requiring DHHR collaborate with Workforce Development Board and West Virginia Division of Personnel for job placement, and reports back a committee substitute for same, with the recommendation that the committee substitute do pass, but under the original double committee reference, first be referred to the Committee on Finance. Respectfully submitted, Roland A. Roberts, Chair.
Report will be received. Recognize the junior senator from the 4th.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the second reference to the Committee on Finance be dispensed for Senate Bill 217. The bill is revenue neutral.
Junior senator from the 17th requests unanimous consent that the second committee reference to the Committee on Finance be dispensed. Is there objection? Chair hears none, so ordered. Report will be received.
Your Committee on the Judiciary has had under consideration Senate Bill 323, Department of Administration Rule for Records Management and Preservation, and reports back a committee substitute for same, with the recommendation that the committee substitute do pass. Respectfully submitted, Charles S. Trump IV, Chair.
Report will be received.
That's all I have, sir.
The reports from select committees.
There are none.
Introduction of bills. The junior senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request unanimous consent that Senate Bill number 506 through 522 be considered introduced, read by their titles, and referred to the appropriate committees as shown on the chamber automation system.
The junior senator from the 17th requests unanimous consent that Senate Bills number 506 through Senate Bill 522 be considered introduced, read by their titles, and referred to the appropriate committees as shown on the chamber automation system. Is there objection? Chair hears none, so ordered. Resolutions.
Senate Concurrent Resolution 7 by Senator Carmichael, Mr. President, naming the U.S. Army Private First Class Clifford O. Eckerd Memorial Bridge.
Under the rules of the Senate, the resolution will lie over one day. Are there further resolutions?
No, sir.
Motions. Petitions.
There are none.
Unfinished business.
Senate Concurrent Resolution 5 requesting the Joint Committee on Government and Finance study ways to achieve higher levels of effectiveness and fairness in public school system.
Resolution will be referred to Committee on Education.
Senate Concurrent Resolution 6 naming the Walter E. Swagger Jr. Memorial Bridge.
Resolution will be referred to the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure.
Senate Resolution 8 designating January 16th, 2020 as Aviation Day.
Senator from Harrison County.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request unanimous consent that the resolution be taken up for immediate consideration, committee reference be dispensed with, and the resolution be placed upon its adoption.
Senator from Harrison County requests unanimous consent that the resolution be taken up for immediate consideration, committee reference be dispensed with, and that the resolution be placed upon its adoption. Is there objection? Chair hears none. Clerk will please read the resolution.
Senate Resolution 8 designating January 16th, 2020 as Aviation Day at the Legislature.
Question before the Senate is adoption of the resolution. Is there discussion? The senator from Harrison County.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's my honor to stand in support of this resolution. You know, this is the 100th year anniversary of aviation in West Virginia, starting back with a Fokker aircraft plant in 1928. I don't know what happened to the Falkers, but they're not here anymore, but we've done better. Today we recognize that aviation in West Virginia means travel for our citizens, both in and out of the state, bringing people in to do commerce in West Virginia. That is one of the most important things that our aviation industry does in West Virginia. But it also means economic development. And every time that we support a regional or local aviation facility in West Virginia, we're helping to create jobs and good jobs. In the Mountain State, air travel is so important to commerce through the 3 major airports we have, the dozens of commercial airports we have, and the general aviation airports around the state, because it allows people to move through what we consider the most beautiful aspect of our state, the mountains, very quickly. But we've done a lot more. In the northern part of the state, we have an aerospace industry that is thriving. It is started with Robert C. Byrd urging a company to put 75 employees in a little building in Bridgeport, West Virginia, which has now grown to over 1,500 direct jobs through companies such as Pratt & Whitney, Bombardier, Aurora, Boeing, and now Mitsubishi. That is both of those. Our travel success and our industrial success is something that we need to continue to nurture and grow, not cannibalize for other areas. All of this has been made possible through the West Virginia Aeronautics Commission and the West Virginia Airport Managers Association, and with great pleasure, I recommend that we adopt the resolution. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Further discussion? The senator from Mercer County.
Thank you, Mr. President. As most of you know, I'm a general aviation pilot myself, and I can't verbalize the value any better than my esteemed friend from Harrison County just did. So I'll just voice my support for passage of the resolution.
Thank you. Further discussion? Further discussion? If not, the question before the Senate is adoption of the resolution. All those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Declare the resolution adopted. The junior senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate stand in brief recess for the purpose of presenting this resolution.
Junior senator from the 17th moves that the Senate stand in brief recess for the purpose of presenting this resolution. All those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Declare the Senate in brief recess to present this resolution. Senate will please come to order. Senate will please come to order. Further unfinished business?
No, sir.
Bills on third reading?
There are none.
Bills on second reading?
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 35, limiting civil penalty for littering conviction to $2,000. Second reading of the bill.
Are there amendments to the bill?
No, sir.
Not, the bill will be engrossed and advanced to third reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 46, defining pepper spray and exempting from definition of deadly weapons. Second reading of the bill.
Are there amendments to the bill?
No, sir.
Not, the bill will be engrossed and advanced to third reading.
Senate Bill 140, changing rate at which certain judges are paid for mileage when traveling within state. Second reading of the bill.
Are there amendments to the bill?
No, sir.
Not, the bill will be engrossed and advanced to third reading.
Senate Bill 170, alleviating double taxation on foreign income at state level. Second reading of the bill.
Are there amendments to the bill?
No, sir.
Not, the bill will be engrossed and advanced to third reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 207, creating Prosecuting Attorneys Detectives Act. Second reading of the bill.
Are there amendments to the bill?
No, sir.
Not, the bill will be engrossed and advanced to third reading.
Senate Bill 310, updating certain terms used in West Virginia Personal Income Tax Act. Second reading of the bill.
Are there amendments to the bill?
No, sir.
Not, the bill will be engrossed and advanced to third reading. Are there further bills on second reading?
No, sir.
Bills on first reading?
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 16, creating Protect Our Right to Unite Act. First reading of the bill.
Bill be advanced.
Senate Bill 42, permitting faith-based electives and classroom drug prevention programs. First reading of the bill.
Bill be advanced.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 225, empowering municipalities to enact adopt-a-street programs. First reading of the bill.
Bill be advanced. Are there further bills on first reading?
No, sir.
Introduction of guest. Remarks by members of the Senate. The senior senator or junior senator from the 8th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted just to take a moment to talk about the issue of pre-existing conditions. And there's been a lot of talk and legislation considered here recently. And I want to start by saying this. By most measures, the state of West Virginia is the oldest, sickest, and most impoverished state in our country. Now, that's not doom and gloom. That's a reality. And we're elected to face those realities here every session and during the interim session. Our Attorney General, Mr. Morrissey, has spent the better part of his career stripping away or fighting to strip away health care protections that protect West Virginians. But now I submit to you that he's the dog that's caught the car. And because of that, and because there's been some movement in attempting to dismantle the Affordable Health Care Act, he has jeopardized health insurance coverage for hundreds of thousands of West Virginians and has now come to the people of West Virginia and said, well, wait a minute, we have a bill that will nonetheless protect folks with pre-existing conditions. Pre-existing conditions, for those who are listening, are health conditions such as pregnancy, heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. Conditions that afflict a strong majority, or not a strong majority, but a healthy minority of our citizens. In fact, 382,000 West Virginians suffer from pre-existing conditions, 37% of our population. Now, this bill that the Attorney General has pushed and has been introduced in this body, Senate Bill 284, is bad and wrong basically for three reasons. One, there's no accountability. It actually delegates the administrative duties to take care and provide insurance for people with pre-existing conditions to some nonprofit organization. I still can't follow that because we're answerable to the people, but obviously nonprofit organizations are not. It increases premiums for folks with pre-existing conditions, and it does that in two ways. One, it puts everyone that has a pre-existing condition in the same pool. It doesn't spread them out with healthy individuals, but puts them all in one pool, which will raise premiums for those individuals. It does it a second way by allowing insurance companies to raise premiums on folks with pre-existing conditions 5 times. So if you're someone with diabetes and you're paying $600 in insurance a month, that means the insurance company can raise that premium to $3,000 a month. And finally, and this is something that's more apparent here recently, the Attorney General's bill, again Senate Bill 284, further burdens our struggling hospitals. Last summer, hospitals in Wheeling shuttered. Here more recently in the Kanawha County, Thomas Memorial Hospital has declared bankruptcy. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But I would submit to you that if someone with health insurance now, private health insurance with a pre-existing condition, and this bill passes, they'll fall out of the insurance market, and then they'll show up at Thomas Memorial Hospital in the emergency room. They won't have to pay for that care. The hospital will. And so it's burdening. That's a consequence of this bill. It further burdens our hospitals. And we can talk, and I hope we see legislation about potentially raising the reimbursement rate when it comes to Medicaid in our hospitals. But this bill is bad for hospitals. Our caucus, the Democrat caucus, has introduced a bill on pre-existing conditions that, in response to this Senate bill, will protect all those individuals with pre-existing conditions by not throwing everyone in the same pool with those particular ailments. So what I'd like today, Mr. President, is to say that I ask this body to not consider Senate Bill 284 and consider the Democrat bill and protect those individuals with pre-existing conditions. West Virginians must come first, and the Attorney General's bill does not do that, and we must restore our healthy communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Further remarks? The senator from Monongalia County.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unanimous consent that the remarks by the junior senator from the 8th be printed in the Appendix Journal.
Without objection, so ordered. Further remarks? The junior senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request unanimous consent that the remarks by the senator from Harrison County regarding Senate Resolution 8 be printed in the Appendix of the Journal.
Without objection, so ordered. Further remarks? The senator from Greenbrier County.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to each of you. The senator from the 8th did a good job there of laying out some policy differences. I'd like to talk about that same topic from a personal perspective. I'm one of the hundreds of thousands of West Virginians who has a pre-existing condition. Mine is a chronic kidney disease, and I've been in a particularly tough battle here as of late. It's a really stressful battle, and it's also a very expensive one. We use that term pre-existing condition a lot. I think that term gets thrown around, and I just want to talk about it from a personal perspective to remind folks that we're talking about people here. We're talking about people with families who are sick, who have tremendously high medical bills, who have anxiety about their future, who have uncertainty about what exactly is going to come next for them and their family. And the last thing that those of us who are in that position need is to be used as political footballs. What we need is some certainty from our leaders. So I just want to be real with folks for a minute about what would happen if I was put in a risk pool with a pre-existing condition as a 38-year-old with a chronic kidney disease that may face dialysis or transplant someday in the future. It would mean higher costs for me. It would mean significantly higher costs. On top of all the copays, on top of all the deductibles, on top of all the travel expenses, on top of all the medications, on top of all the phone calls to insurance companies every single day, on top of the denials and the paperwork and the technicalities, on top of constantly being denied coverage, we would have to try and purchase health care from a risk pool, paying much higher prices than we pay now, and we'd be marked with a scarlet letter in that risk pool. So, I mean, if the statistics hold, I'm certainly not alone. Anywhere from a third to a half of this body are in exactly the same, or at least similar circumstances I'm in. What I'm asking for is, please don't make us a political football. We don't want to be another statistic. All we want is for insurance companies to not be able to pull the rug out from under us at a given time because of everything else that we're going through. So this is really personal for me. People are fighting for their lives out there, and we're not expecting anybody else to take up our banner or fight for us. All we're expecting is to not fight against us. Please don't hurt us in our fight. We can't move backwards. We need to ensure that people with pre-existing conditions don't lose coverage. And there's a really simple way to do that. We've got a bill coming up. We've all signed on to it. I don't see any reason why everybody in the body wouldn't sign on to it, because this isn't partisan, this isn't political, it's personal. It's trying to make sure that we take care of our people and our families. I want to thank you all. Y'all been very supportive of me over the last 2 years, and I'll be forever grateful for that. Thank you for the time, Mr. President.
Thank you. Further remarks? The senator from Tucker County.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm glad this was brought up this morning, because this puts a rock in my crawl, so to speak. I've worked my whole life, almost 41 years as a coal miner. You know, I'm getting at the age where I can retire, but I'm not going to be able to retire because I can't find affordable health care. Now, if I would have laid around at the house and lived off the government, or just didn't want to work all my life, I could get affordable health care that President Obama brought us. That's affordable health care. But no, I got to keep them working so I can pay for everybody else's health care. But I can't get, I checked on health care, $1,600 to $1,800 a month for an 80/20. That's what I have to pay. I've worked my whole life, and I can't retire, but I have to continue to work so I can pay for everybody else's health care, because I can't afford mine. So yes, this is a problem. It's a problem, but I get sick and tired of hearing affordable health care. It's affordable health care for some, but it's not affordable health care for others. If you have worked your life like I have, and a lot of you in here have, and we got a lot of people in the state of West Virginia, it gets up and goes to work every day, but we can't afford to retire. But now if we just lay around and don't go to work and never pick up a dinner bucket, we get our health care. I can go in the emergency room. I have health care now. It costs me $300 out of my pocket if I go to the emergency room. But I might have to wait 3-4 hours because the emergency room's clear full of people that doesn't have to pay a dime. They don't have to get up the next morning and go to work. I get home 12, 1 o'clock, get up next morning, go to work. Now you tell me how that's fair. You tell me how that's affordable health care. Yes, I'm angry about it because I'm sick of carrying everybody that does not want to work. I don't mind helping out the people in need. There's a lot of people that needs this, that needs help. But it's not fair for us, the working class, and I consider myself the working class, that have to work the rest of their life because they can't afford affordable health care, but we're expected to pay for everybody else's that don't care if they contribute to society. So, Mr. President, I'm for affordable health care. I'm for fair health care for everybody. I'm a diabetic. I've got black lung, so don't tell me about pre-existing. I've got pre-existing, and the only way I can keep insurance is to keep on working because I can't afford because of affordable health care. Yeah, it's affordable some, but I can tell you right now it's not affordable for everyone. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Are there further remarks? The senator from Monongalia County again.
Thank you, Mr. President. Unanimous consent that the comments by the junior senator from the 10th be printed in the appendix of the journal.
The senator from Monongalia County requests unanimous consent that the senator from Greenbriers County be printed in the appendix of the journal. Is there objection? Chair hears none, so ordered. The senator from Braxton County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Along the lines of what we've heard, you know, we have a responsibility. And one of our biggest responsibilities is to the citizens of our state. And like the senator said, we're talking about working people now. We're talking about people who've tried to push the wagon and help move things forward. See, the people who don't have jobs, when their child gets sick or something, they can take them and receive medical help at no cost. But what about our employees who can't afford to pay, you know, we pay half of our employees' insurance, but that still leaves an employee with 2 children paying $700 or $800 a month. I mean, this is the richest country in the world. We've seen where people have to ride buses to go to Canada to get their insulin. I mean, what's wrong, folks? This is a real tragedy in our country that folks go to work every day trying to set the example for their children of right and wrong and how that you should go to work, and they can't take them to the doctor. They have to go to the drugstore and buy off-the-counter medicines. I mean, look, we talk about education and all these things, and it's all important. But what's more important than health care? How are you going to be a productive citizen? Or how are you going to be a good student if you've got health issues? Now look, this isn't Democrat or Republican. This is West Virginia problem. And the folks that elected us to come down here and represent us, they want some help. Mr. President, I would ask that you would form a committee of Democrats and Republicans to come up with something that both of us could accept and work with. Let's try to make an example. Let's try to change the opinion of West Virginia across the United States. Let's try to do something for our citizens. It's our opportunity. It's our burden. Now, are we going to accept it, or are we just going to shuffle it along? But folks, I'm telling you, this is a major problem. And it's a major problem for the people who goes to work every day and tries to pay their taxes and do what's right. And like I said earlier, this is the richest country in the world. And we got working folk that can't go to the doctor. We ought to be ashamed of ourselves. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Further remarks? The junior senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to take a minute to talk about direction and a little bit about vision, and then come back around to some of the health care stuff that I've got to hear about and concerns that our members have. In 2017, I just want to take a minute to look at where we started and what we've been recognized for nationwide by very recognized journals and publications. We were the second in the nation in 2017 in GDP growth. So leadership changed direction and changed vision on how we were going to structure regulation, on how we were going to structure tax, how we were going to bring business and jobs into West Virginia. Your gross domestic product, the GDP, is a reflection of what those jobs do. It's what the people of West Virginia produce. It's what they sweat for, it's what they risk for, it's what they leave their family for to day after day to go produce a product, sell it, and it produces revenue. In 2018, we led the nation in the rate of GDP growth, little West Virginia. The first quarter of 2019, we were the #1 in the country for personal income growth. Now think about that. We've been talking about how bad a shape we're in. You know what? Sometimes it's about the direction. It reminds me of my kids when we're getting ready to leave, and you're trying to round them up, get them in the car, and you get to going someplace, and you know where you're going, you know how to get there, you've seen it done, and they're saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And that's what this feels like. And what I can tell you is, you know what? Yeah, we're on our way, and see, if you stop along the way, I can tell you, do you recognize this? Because that's an indicator we're heading in the direction. When we get to Grandma's, you'll remember we passed the convenience store. You'll see we passed Walmart along the way. You'll see we passed a school. And so, yeah, we're getting closer, And so, you know, Mr. President, I've heard you in a conversation, and I think it was a really good remark. And you commented on the disparity of prosperity, right? So West Virginia, we have 55 counties, and some of these counties are doing exceptionally well. Some of the counties are struggling. We're going to have a bill from this legislature that every county in this state should be jumping up and down to get passed. And there's a lot of misunderstandings and misperceptions just because it's been in the conversation, but the data's not out there yet. So that bill is going to be to amend the Constitution of West Virginia so that the legislature can control the tax on machinery, equipment, and inventory for manufacturers. So that ticket alone is, if you look at the strongest year down to the weakest year, the strongest year, it's about $100 million. Still guaranteed in the Constitution with that amendment will be funding of our schools, because there's a school aid formula that just determines that those schools are going to get the money. We just passed a big bill out and funded them heavier than they've ever been funded in this state's history past year, because of economic policy that has produced gross domestic product rate of growth. So this bill, when you look at it, counties are worried, how are we going to be made whole? Everybody in this room is very, very familiar with the volatility of the coal severance tax. If you were to look that thing on a graph, it looks like the beautiful West Virginia mountains. It's up and down, and it's up and down, and it's up and down. You go back the past 5 years, every county that receives money from the machinery, equipment, and inventory tax on manufacturing, that's what their graph looks like. So if you now go back and look at those counties, I would just think for a second, how many of those counties do you think have income from that tax? There is a group, and we get this Constitution amended so we can, one, get these jobs into these counties. Because here's what the reality is. 39 of our 55 counties, the revenue that comes into those counties for that is less, around 1% or less of their all revenue that comes into county. 39 of them. You wonder why manufacturing's not coming in there? 26 of the 39, it's zero. Zero. I can give you an example. Just some numbers I was rolling through this morning. Work County got $132 last year for manufacturing on machinery and equipment, Mr. President. This is something we can do that is real. If you have somebody who is manufacturing in your county, they're creating jobs, they're creating product, they're probably paying for health care for those employees. Would you not like for them to be competitive? What does it mean to them if 8%, so this cuts this tax in half? If we get this, not if, when we get rid of this, because I can't imagine that any of you would not want to create jobs in your district, because that's what this leads to. When we do this, that tax goes from about 15.9% to about 8%. You know what? We are still about double Pennsylvania when we do that. And we're still more than Ohio. But I tell you what we are doing is we're giving those businesses the ability to grow, the ability to compete, the ability to do health care for their employees. The way that this would be structured, it happens over time. This is absolutely fiscally possible. It is not an impossibility. $100 million is what we're talking about. It can be done, and it can be done over time. You can phase it in. And as you phase it in, there's revenue that comes back on that because of these jobs that are created, because of the increased productivity, because of the increased sales these manufacturers in the state of West Virginia can do. And you can go back and it pays for itself. Now, if you're a county, and you're saying, well, what about, I'm guaranteed this in the Constitution. You know what? You got to kind of look at this from a different perspective. Go look at that graphic. Look at the income that came to your county since 2015 every year, and look at those West Virginia mountains drawn on that graph. It is up and down, up and down. We can go back to get that $100 million, take the absolute most tax that you paid in a given year, and we can guarantee that in perpetuity with legislation. So no longer do you see this, you stay here and you go here. It's more money for those counties. Not only is it more money just there, what you just did, you just opened your county to more jobs. Counties should be elated that we're talking about this. They should be knocking down our doors, emailing you each, calling you, and anybody who can hear my voice from this speech on this floor should be calling their legislators and calling their local county officials and saying, get this done. So now let's talk about the health care side of this. or the pseudo insurance that is created by Obamacare. I'm a health care provider, as many of you know, and I'm also an employer, and I pay for health insurance for a great many of our employees. And I can tell you it's becoming a growing line item. And every time that grows, that's less money that I can invest in employees. It's less money I can invest in physical structure. It's less money I can do to open a new business. And the pseudo-insurance side of it comes from as those premiums grow and they grow and grow, well, I'll tell you what's happened since Obamacare came along. Insurance is not insurance anymore. What they do is they jack up your deductible, they jack up your copay, they jack up your co-insurance. And so what all happens there? All that cost gets shifted to you. Your employer's paying a skyrocketed premium, growing at double-digit growth, and so are you. And then you don't really have insurance because it's obstructed by that co-insurance, that copay, and that deductible. That's what Obamacare has given us. And what's the result of that? How many people who are now jobless because health care has priced jobs out of the freaking market, if they can't go get the job that provides health care, but then they're paying it on their own, and all that cost is shifted to the individual, how easy do you think that is for a hospital to collect that payment? Go look at the accounts receivable at any hospital in this state and see what it's doing. It is growing. And so it is with the private health care providers in this state as well. We have got the map. We've been drawing it out. If you want to see where we've been, it's everywhere you want to go look in the articles. It's in the journals. It's in nationally recognized growth of this state. And I am so proud to be a part of it. I would hope that our members across the aisle, when we are sitting here talking about Aviation Day and the economic growth that aviation brings to this state, especially in manufacturing around aviation, how much more competitive could those businesses be that are actually fabricating the parts of airplanes and rockets and helicopters if we allowed them to be competitive instead of taxing them out of existence? So, Mr. President, thank you for your leadership, and I'm ready to get this rolling.
Thank you. Further remarks? The senator from Harrison County.
Thank you. Let me apologize in advance for prolonging the floor session, but you know, the inventory tax is a kind of an enigma to me. I've heard about it, you know, every year I've been here. We've done nothing about it because it takes bipartisan support. And partisan speeches, while great for the camera, aren't going to help us to try to resolve that issue. I'm a businessman. I hate the inventory and business personal property tax because it's a gross income tax. I pay it whether I make money or not. But you know what? And the numbers seems to vary. I heard 100 million, I've heard 240 million. We can't eliminate that tax without the support of replacing it with a tax that saves our counties and public school system. This body cannot guarantee that the general fund will be able to make up that tax that's so necessary to the operation of the counties, that's so necessary to the operation of the public school system. And what will end up happening is we'll transfer the burden that's on business to individuals because they're going to have to raise everybody's real estate taxes in order to make budget, in order to not go bankrupt. So, you know, all the talk we have, if we don't come up with a logical plan to try to replace it, and it's one of the few things that my friends across the aisle can't do on their own. You can do just about everything on your own except this, because it's a constitutional amendment. We need to work together to find a replacement, not just try to force the repeal of that tax on the backs of the West Virginia taxpayer and homeowner. You know, back in 2014, and it hasn't changed much, we were the 17th lowest tax state in the country, 15th lowest business tax state. That's from the National Tax Foundation. I don't run it. It's actually run by donations from groups that support both sides of the aisle. But if you look around the state, around our surrounding states, Pennsylvania was in the high 40s. We're in the low teens. Ohio was in the mid-20s. Virginia was in the mid-20s. I can't remember exactly. I didn't plan on getting up and speaking. Maryland is in the low 30s. That's how much lower our overall taxes are in this state than they are anywhere else in the surrounding states. So the argument that some have and don't have property taxes for businesses is a little bit misleading because they have it in different forms. The Tax Foundation says 32 states have some form of business personal property tax. Still, I want to get rid of it. Still, it's a good tax to eliminate, but you can't eliminate it on the backs of the counties and the public school system. We've spent years in here trying to improve the public school system. I'd say we've failed in large part, but at least we've improved it somewhat. We can't turn around and say that this is something we need to do to make West Virginia competitive. I've been involved in bringing in hundreds, if not thousands of jobs. I've yet to have a business say your tax system's out of whack. Again, it's a good tax to get rid of if you can replace it with. So I take no credit for this. They lowered business taxes almost $400 million. In the subsequent years, and it's been now almost a decade since that was done, we lost private employment jobs. We didn't gain any. It didn't make us any more competitive. It made us less competitive. Because what we need is a good education system. We need educated employees. When I talk to employers, what they ask me every time is, can you supply an educated workforce? We can't under these circumstances. We need roads. We need water and sewer. That's what this body can provide. Now, if we can find a way to replace the business personal property tax, I'll be right with you. If you ask me to help, I'm happy to help. Nobody ever does, but I'd be happy to help, as would anybody else in this body, I'm sure. And if we that does not cripple our county governments and our public school system, you get our support. But if it just continues to be rhetoric about competition, about being able to be job creators, which I've never seen a job creator create a job yet unless he can make a profit off of it, he or she, we're not going to get anywhere again. So let's work together if we want to accomplish that, and let's just forget about the rhetoric. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further remarks by members? Further remarks? Junior Senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also apologize for delaying floor session, but I had the opportunity this morning to go to an 8th grade classroom here in Kanawha County and talk to 8th grade kids about the legislative process. And it was pretty eye-opening for me because what the perception is not the reality. And so the reality is they would ask questions about Republicans and Democrats and why they always fight. And I said, well, the reality is that typically makes a better law. Republicans aren't always right. Democrats aren't always right. Republicans aren't always wrong. Democrats always are wrong. So when we work together, usually what comes out of that is a better law for most of us. You know, of course, I deal with health care every day, and it breaks my heart when those with pre-existing conditions come in, and I agree it shouldn't be a political football. These are people we're talking about, and every single one of us, and I see it on a day-to-day basis. My mother gets on to me for traveling all the time when I get a little bit of time off, and I tell her all the time, you don't understand. Every day I see people a lot younger and healthier than me. They're not going to be here next week, and so I try to enjoy life as much as I can. We're all just a car accident away, a cancer diagnosis away, a stroke, a heart attack. We're all going to be, if we're not already, we're a pre-existing condition tomorrow. So we got to keep that in mind. The problem with health care, and I'm glad my friend from Harrison brought this up because it's a difficult topic. If it was easy, it would have been solved before us. It's not going to be solved by us. It won't be solved completely behind us, but we can certainly do what we can today to make this better. And it's really an issue of three things. It's a demand, a supply, and an economic issue. And the problem is the demand in this state is great. We're the unhealthiest state in the country. We're the most obese. We have the highest smoking rates. We have the worst diabetes of any state in the country. We have the worst heart disease. So if we're all being honest, and I think that's what everybody's trying to get to, if we're all being honest and we're all going to face it, we can't talk out both sides of their mouths. We all stand up, Republicans and Democrats, and talk about, oh, we're going to improve jobs and we're going to improve health care. Well, when you've got opportunities in front of you to do that, you got to take advantage of it. We're not going to cure everything, but we can certainly make it better. A couple years ago, we raised a tobacco tax. We are the only state in the country for the past couple decades where the smoking rates has continued to increase, and I don't think there's any doubt in anybody's mind smoking's bad for you. Cancer, heart disease, multiple cardiovascular disease, stroke, etc. And multiple states, you know, every law we look at, we say, well, what are the other states? What's the effect? The one thing, there's nothing doctors can do that'll make you quit smoking, but if you increase the tax, you'll see smoking rates decline, and that's exactly what has happened. We raised those taxes in 2015, and now the governor's touting we've got a $300 million surplus. In the past, Medicaid, you know, struggled. Well, in the unhealthiest state, all of a sudden we've got a $300 million surplus. So if we're going to be serious about this, the question should be, what can we do about obesity? What can we do about smoking rates? What are we going to do with vaping? That's going to be the other issue coming up. These kids are vaping left and right. My daughter can't even use the restroom at her high school. 3 girls are in each stall vaping. Why? It's smokeless. It's odorless. Teachers, if they do a bathroom check, they can't go in there and check the stalls. They stick it in their pocket when they're told to come out. You're not allowed to frisk them. So you don't get in trouble, and it continues. So vaping is going to be the next injury, and we don't know. It's just like asbestos. It was a wonderful product until 30 years later when we realized it was killing everybody. We're already seeing it now. Quick, you know, I've been giving floor speeches for 4 years now about vaping and what it does to the lungs. We're starting to see it. I mean, you literally could have taken a floor speech I gave in 2015 and played it on the news this past year, and it would have looked like I could have looked back in time. Things that go in the lungs aren't supposed to go in the lungs except for air. So if we're truly wanting to tackle this head on, we got to do something about the demand of health care. And the only way you can really do that is do everything in your power to try to help people be healthier. So one proposal might be increase the smoking tax, the vape tax. Let's get that down further. WVU did a great study. I've talked about that before. $244 million savings. They said if we could drop 10% the smoking rates in West Virginia. I don't know what the percentage has actually dropped to, but we increased the tax, smoking rates are down, all of a sudden we've got a $300 million surplus. Supply is the other issue, you know, and I've talked about that. We've got bills to try to bring medical providers into the state. It's a fact that if a person goes to the doctor, it's a fact that if they take their own initiative in healthcare, the healthcare cost and the health of the people are better. But we're going to have a major supply issue. We don't have enough. We've got a major nursing shortage. What are we doing to possibly try to help our nursing shortage in this state? Every single day in the intensive care units, one hospital, we cover Thomas, we got beds closed. There's people that desperately need those beds from all around the state. We don't have enough nurses to open them. CMC, we turn patients away every single day almost. There's patients that critically need the specialists we have at CMC for that. We don't have the nurses to staff them. We're going to have a major, you know, in 2020, this year, the DOs and the MDs, the two predominant, or the only two doctors in the country, they've made a merger. They've come together starting this year. And because of that, foreign medical graduates are not going to have U.S. residency spots to come here and practice. Now, how does that affect West Virginia? If you notice, we got a lot of foreign medical, great doctors, but they try to get their ticket to come into the country by agreeing, once they graduate, they'll go to an underserved area in West Virginia. And if they practice 3, 4, 5 years, depending on their agreement, they can stay here for their lives and they can work. Well, why do we have so many here? They're not all young guys. A lot of our foreign medical graduates are old guys. And that's because once they get here for 3 or 4 years, they grow roots. They become part of the community. They buy houses. Their kids start school. They're respected and they stay. So we've had bills for 3 or 4 years now to try to entice doctors to come to West Virginia. It's not gone anywhere. I don't think we've ever got them out of the Senate. But that starts in 2020. I think the average age of a physician in this state is around 56, 58 years old. In just another 5, 10 years, we're going to have a crisis. You can't get doctors in West Virginia. I mean, we get job offers once and twice a week, especially the specialists. Great salaries, live other places. Everybody's got major doctor shortages. So if we don't act now, what are you going to do in 5, 10 years when you no longer have specialists, when you no longer, and you don't want to have to jump in the back of an ambulance or plane to chuck it clear to Cleveland or something to get a surgery that could have been done right here. So if we're really being honest with ourselves, we got to look at all this in combination. If we're truly here to fix the problem, because we're all not going to be senators for everybody. Nobody's going to remember any of us when we leave. You walk down the hall and glance at the pictures, great. But what we can do is make an impact on this state. But we're going to have to do it working together, and we're going to have to look at it from the 10,000-foot view and say what's truly going to make the difference. We're not going to be able to fix Obamacare or this or that, but we can fix pieces that can make a difference and make an impact today. We've already seen it just a few years ago with that tax we've done. We've seen declines and improvements. If we do things to fund tobacco cessation, if we do things to affect cardiac, if we do things to get providers in here, we can start fixing these. The third leg of that's economics. I have patients, and I'm not a complete, I didn't like Obamacare, but there's great things about some aspects. I love great things. Pre-existing conditions is the number one. I love that. It has to be. I don't think either body in this chamber or even on the other side disagree. That has to be a key component of that. But at the same time, I have patients that come into the office that are kind of what people classify as working poor, that are forced into the exchange, and they're paying $1,200 a month. They don't have it. Now they don't have money to buy their insulin, so we fight every day to try to do workarounds and get them things. So the only thing that's really going to fix that's economics. So everything we can do to work together to bring jobs and improve the economy, that's really going to be the only fix, because there's just not enough economic or money and supply for all the demand that we have, and that's going to be the case long after we're gone. But what we can do is everything and strive to do everything we can in our power to improve the economics, to improve the numbers, and get things more in the favorable condition the best we can. So anyways, I hate to go on, Mr. President, but I just want to put those 2 cents in. Thank you.
Further remarks? Further remarks? Put him. Randy. Senator from Morgan County, request unanimous consent that the remarks by Senator from Morgan County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Taking the hint. I request unanimous consent that the remarks by the Majority Leader be printed in the appendix of the Journal. Senator from the 4th, his remarks. The remarks by the Senator from Harrison, Senator from Braxton, Senator from Tucker, Senator from Greenbrier County, all be printed in the appendix to the Journal.
Without objection, so ordered. Is Senator, Senior Senator from the 8th seek recognition, or Junior Senator from the 8th seek recognition?
Make a quick announcement. I didn't know if that was the right time to do it.
We'll get there in just a second. Yes. Our miscellaneous business, Junior Senator from 17.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pending announcements, I move the Senate stand adjourned until tomorrow at 11 a.m.
Are there announcements? The Junior Senator from the 8th.
Mr. President, the West Virginia AFL-CIO will have a labor caucus today immediately following this floor session in room 330 West. Lunch will be provided.
Further announcements, the Senator from Morgan County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on the Judiciary will meet this afternoon at 3 p.m. in 208 West Wing.
Senator from Jefferson County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Education will meet at 2 p.m. in 451M.
Further announcements, the Senior Senator from the 6th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Government Organization will meet today at 2 p.m. at 208 West. The agenda has been posted.
Further, the Senator from Marshall County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Committee on Health will not be meeting today.
Further announcements, the Junior Senator from the 4th.
Mr. President, your Committee on Finance will meet today at 3 p.m. The Finance Committee room. Budget hearings from the West Virginia Conservation Agency and Department of Agriculture will be heard.
Further announcements, the Senator from Tucker County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Energy will meet today at 1 o'clock in the Judiciary Committee room.
Further announcements? If not, the question before the Senate is, shall the Senate stand adjourned until tomorrow at 11 a.m.? All those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Declare the Senate adjourned until tomorrow at 11 a.m.
This is the West Virginia Intelligence Fusion Center. It's supposed to investigate criminal and terrorist activity happening in our state under the Department of Military Affairs and Public Safety, or DMAPS.
We are the central hub for any public safety, law enforcement, intelligence gathering and dissemination. So we would gather information for any public safety or law enforcement situation and then get that information to the people who need it.
Last Thursday, the governor issued an executive order calling on DMAPS to create a narcotics intelligence task force unit within the Fusion Center. Director Lukart says the task force would share information and resources with local law enforcement, especially in rural areas, which can't afford to hire their own forensic accountants or computer specialists. He used to work on narcotics investigations for Putnam County.
Coming from my background as a law enforcement officer, and specifically in drug investigations and narcotics investigations, the intel side of an investigation takes that case to a completely another level. It provides the investigators with information and intelligence that they otherwise would not have. It helps to identify targets. It helps to identify associates. It helps to identify assets, things that can take these cases to another level.
DMAPS Secretary Jeff Sandy says the task force also will collaborate with forces in other states and the federal government to detect drug crimes involving West Virginia that have actually originated somewhere else.
If we can work with them and stop the drugs in Ohio and Michigan, for example, we have done a service to West Virginia citizens.
Ohio actually created a narcotics